Jessica Morgan, 34, stood frozen in the grand ballroom as her father's words echoed through the microphone, publicly dismantling the image of their perfect family. What should have been a dignified retirement celebration had transformed into her personal nightmare. The truth her husband was about to reveal would not only shatter her father's carefully crafted reputation, but would forever change the dynamics of the entire Morgan family. Hey there, before I dive deeper into how my world came crashing down that night, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family drama already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family betrayals and sweet justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this rollercoaster of emotions. Growing up as Charles Morgan's daughter meant living in a perfectly curated world. My father, the esteemed neurosurgeon at Boston Memorial Hospital, was revered not just for his steady hands that saved countless lives, but for his impeccable reputation as a family man. Our Beacon Hill home, with its polished hardwood floors and family portraits displaying practiced smiles, was featured twice in Boston Living magazine as the embodiment of success and familial harmony. My mother, Eleanor, a former ballet dancer turned philanthropist, orchestrated charity galas that were the talk of the city's elite social circles. My younger brother, Nathan, followed in father's footsteps at Harvard Medical School, carrying the Morgan legacy forward without missing a beat. And then there was me, Jessica Morgan, the perpetual disappointment. Despite graduating summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in journalism, I never quite measured up to the Morgan standard. My career writing for online publications instead of prestigious print newspapers was a phase, according to my father. My apartment in Cambridge was quaint, a polite word for inadequate. My fashion choices were interesting, code for inappropriate. Every family dinner became an exercise in deflecting subtle criticisms and backhanded compliments. Jessica still doing that internet writing thing, my father would ask my mother across the dinner table, as if I weren't sitting right there. It's digital journalism, Dad, I would correct him, my voice growing smaller each time. My last investigative piece on pharmaceutical pricing had over 2 million reads. That's nice, dear. Pass the salt, would you, would be his only response. When I met Daniel West at a journalism conference 3 years ago, I was immediately drawn to his quiet confidence. Unlike the polished, pedigreed men my parents subtly pushed my way, Daniel was authentic. A former military intelligence officer turned cybersecurity specialist, he had a straightforward manner that cut through the pretense I'd grown up with. Our connection was immediate and genuine, something I'd never experienced within the carefully constructed relationships my family approved of. "You dating someone from a public university?" my mother had asked when I first mentioned him, her eyebrows arching in practiced concern. "He seems nice," my father had added with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But are you sure he'll understand our world, Jessica? You know how important connections are." What they really meant was, he wasn't one of us. He didn't come from money. He didn't have the right last name, or belong to the right clubs. What they couldn't understand was that those were precisely the reasons I loved him. Daniel saw through the Morgan facade immediately. "Your family puts on quite a show," he whispered to me during his first dinner at my parents' home, where my father had spent 20 minutes detailing Nathan's latest academic achievement while barely acknowledging my recent journalism award. "You have no idea," I'd whispered back. Our wedding a year later was, in my mother's words, understated, another coded criticism, meaning it wasn't the extravagant society event she had envisioned for her daughter. My father's toast was brief and impersonal, focusing more on the Morgan family legacy than on my happiness or future with Daniel. I noticed how Daniel's jaw tightened as my father spoke, how his eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure, squeezing my hand under the table. "They don't see who you really are," Daniel told me that night in our hotel room. "But I do, and you're extraordinary." What I didn't know then was that Daniel saw more than just me clearly. He saw through my entire family with a precision that would eventually expose decades of carefully hidden truths. And my father's retirement dinner would be the stage where everything would finally come to light. As the date of the grand celebration approached, my anxiety grew. 40 years at Boston Memorial Hospital meant my father's retirement dinner would be nothing short of spectacular. The who's who of Boston medical royalty would be there, along with family friends who had known us for decades, all expecting the perfect Morgan family to put on their perfect show. Just one night, my mother reminded me during our weekly call. One night to celebrate your father's legacy. Please wear something appropriate, Jessica. The burgundy dress I sent you perhaps, not those modern outfits you favor. I agreed, swallowing my resentment. One night of pretending. I could manage that. What I couldn't have anticipated was how that one night would unravel 34 years of lies and forever change who I understood my father and myself to be. The week before my father's retirement dinner, unusual cracks began appearing in the Morgan family facade. It started with a phone call from my brother Nathan, something so rare it immediately put me on alert. Jess, have you noticed anything strange with Dad lately? His voice carried an unfamiliar edge of concern. Strange how? I asked, putting my laptop aside. Nathan and I weren't close, he had always been my father's golden child, and that created a distance between us that neither of us had tried to bridge. He's been, I don't know, jumpy? Paranoid? He asked me if anyone had been asking questions about his practice or patients. When I asked why, he brushed it off as pre-retirement jitters. I frowned, trying to recall my last interaction with my father. I haven't spoken to him much lately, just the usual formal call about dinner arrangements for Saturday. Mom's been running the show. That's another thing, Nathan continued, lowering his voice as if someone might overhear. Mom and Dad are barely speaking. I stopped by yesterday, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. This was unexpected. In the Morgan household, conflicts were never acknowledged, merely buried beneath layers of propriety and pretense. Maybe it's just retirement stress, I offered, though something in Nathan's tone made me uneasy. Dad's entire identity is wrapped up in being Dr. Morgan. Losing that title must be jarring. Maybe, Nathan didn't sound convinced. Just keep your eyes open at the dinner, okay? Something doesn't feel right. After hanging up, I immediately called Daniel, who was away on a cybersecurity consultation in New York. His calm rationality always helped center me when my family sent me spiraling. Your brother actually called you. Voluntarily. Daniel sounded as surprised as I felt. That is unusual. I know. And he sounded genuinely concerned about Dad. There was a pause on the line, longer than typical for Daniel. Jess, there's something I need to tell you before the dinner. I've been working on a project. But before he could continue, his voice was drowned out by an announcement in the background. Sorry, they're calling my flight. We'll talk when I get home tomorrow, okay? I love you. The next day, Daniel's flight was delayed, and he arrived home exhausted. Whatever he had wanted to tell me was pushed aside, as we rushed to prepare for a dinner party with friends. By the time we had a moment alone, it was late, and we both fell asleep mid-conversation. The subject never came back up. Meanwhile, my mother's calls became increasingly frequent and micromanaging as the retirement dinner approached. Jessica, I've seated you and Daniel at table 3 with the Harringtons and the Blakes, she informed me. Dr. Blake's daughter Rebecca will be there. You remember her, Yale Medical School, just finished her residency. Such a lovely girl. Perhaps Daniel could discuss some business opportunities with Dr. Blake. They are always looking for security consultants at the hospital. The subtext was clear: make useful connections, advance your husband's career since yours is so disappointing. I bit back a retort about Daniel's company already being highly successful without the Morgan network's help. And do remind Daniel about the speech protocols, she continued. Your father's colleagues will speak first, then Nathan, then your father will give his remarks. No need for Daniel to prepare anything. Daniel wasn't planning to speak, Mom, I said, irritation creeping into my voice. Good, good. The program is quite full already. Oh, and the photographer will want family photos at 7 p.m. sharp. The burgundy dress will photograph beautifully with our color scheme. 3 days before the event, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Dr. Evelyn Chen, one of my father's longtime colleagues, stood at my doorstep looking uncomfortable. Jessica, I apologize for dropping by unannounced. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. I invited her in, puzzled. Dr. Chen had always been kind to me, one of the few people in my father's circle who showed genuine interest in my journalism career. I'm not sure I should be here, she said, declining my offer of tea. But I respect your father greatly, and I respect the truth even more. My stomach tightened. What's this about, Dr. Chen? She placed a thick manila envelope on my coffee table. There are rumors circulating at the hospital. Your father's retirement, it may not be entirely voluntary. What do you mean? The board has been conducting a quiet investigation for months. Patient complaints, irregular procedures, possible insurance fraud. Nothing is public yet, but... She gestured to the envelope. These are copies of some concerning records that crossed my desk. I'm on the ethics committee, you see. My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. Why are you showing me this? Dr. Chen's eyes held genuine sympathy. Because Saturday night, everyone will be celebrating a legacy that may be built on sand. And because I've watched your father dismiss your accomplishments for years, while you've built a career uncovering truths. You deserve to know this truth, Jessica. After she left, I sat staring at the unopened envelope, afraid of what it might contain. When Daniel arrived home, he found me in the same position. Jess? What's wrong? His eyes fell to the envelope. What's that? I explained Dr. Chen's visit, my voice hollow with shock. I haven't looked inside. I'm afraid of what I'll find. Daniel sat beside me, his expression unreadable. I need to tell you something, Jess. It's about your father. I've been investigating him for the past 6 months. You've been what? I stared at him, uncomprehending. It started when you mentioned those experimental surgeries he was so secretive about. Something didn't add up. I did some digging, called in some favors from my intelligence days. What I found. He took a deep breath. It's not good, Jess. Tell me, I whispered, though part of me already knew that whatever was in that envelope and whatever Daniel had discovered would shatter the image of Charles Morgan forever. And as Daniel began to explain, I realized the retirement dinner wouldn't be celebrating my father's legacy, it would be exposing it. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Boston gleamed with understated opulence, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. A massive banner hung above the stage, celebrating 40 years of excellence, Dr. Charles Morgan. A life-sized portrait of my father in his surgical scrubs, looking authoritative and benevolent, stood on an easel by the entrance. Beside it, a digital slideshow displayed images of his career milestones, philanthropic endeavors, and family moments carefully selected to reinforce the narrative of the perfect doctor with the perfect life. I adjusted the burgundy dress my mother had insisted upon, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. Daniel stood beside me in his tailored navy suit, his expression giving nothing away about the bombshell he had dropped 2 days earlier. We had spent hours discussing whether to confront my father privately before the event, or let the evening proceed as planned. In the end, we We decided to wait and watch to give my father one last chance to acknowledge his actions himself. Ready? Daniel squeezed my hand reassuringly. I nodded, though ready was the furthest thing from how I felt. The manila envelope from Dr. Chen sat locked in our apartment, its contents corroborating everything Daniel had discovered independently. The truth about Charles Morgan was far uglier than I had ever imagined. Jessica. Daniel. There you are. My mother glided toward us, elegant in midnight blue Chanel, her smile fixed and brittle. The photographer is waiting. We are doing family photos before the guests arrive en masse. She led us to a backdrop where my father stood with Nathan, both in identical black tuxedos with matching bow ties. My father's silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his posture impeccable as always, but I noticed new lines of tension around his eyes. Jessica, he acknowledged me with a curt nod before turning to Daniel with forced joviality. Daniel, good to see you. How's the computer business? Cybersecurity, Daniel corrected smoothly, shaking my father's hand with a grip that seemed to make my father wince slightly. It's going exceptionally well. In fact, I just wrapped up a fascinating project. Perhaps we can discuss it later. Something flickered in my father's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear, before his practiced smile reasserted itself. Of course. Though tonight is about celebration, not business. The photographer arranged us in the traditional Morgan family formation, my father center stage, my mother at his side, Nathan next to him, and me slightly off-center beside my mother. Daniel was positioned at the edge, almost an afterthought. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Perfect family portrait, the photographer exclaimed, oblivious to the currents of tension flowing between us. As guests began arriving, I observed my father working the room with his characteristic charm, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about surgeries performed and lives saved. But there was something different in his demeanor, a hypervigilance, as if he were constantly assessing who was speaking to whom, what was being said. He knows something's coming, Daniel murmured in my ear, as we watched my father abruptly steer a conversation away from a mention of the hospital board. By the time dinner was served, the ballroom was filled with over 200 guests, hospital administrators, fellow surgeons, wealthy patients, and Boston's elite. At our table, conversation flowed around us, but I barely heard it, my attention divided between my father at the head table and the knowledge weighing heavily in my chest. Are you all right, dear? You've hardly touched your salmon. Mrs. Harrington, a longtime family friend, peered at me with concern. Just excited for my father, I lied, forcing a smile. It's a big night. After the main course, the formal program began. The hospital director spoke glowingly about my father's contributions to neurosurgery. The chief of staff recalled humorous anecdotes from their residency days. A former patient tearfully recounted how Dr. Morgan had saved her life with a risky procedure no other surgeon would attempt. Each speech reinforced the myth of Charles Morgan, surgical genius and humanitarian. Each word felt like a needle under my skin, knowing what I now knew. Then it was Nathan's turn. My brother approached the podium, confidence radiating from every pore. He began with the expected platitudes about our father's brilliance and dedication, but then his speech took an unexpected turn. My father taught me that a surgeon's reputation is everything, Nathan said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. Integrity, he always said, is the foundation of trust between doctor and patient. He paused, and I saw him glance at my father, whose smile had frozen in place. Which is why I've always found it difficult to reconcile those teachings with certain discrepancies I've observed. A murmur rippled through the audience. My mother's spine stiffened beside my father. I exchanged a startled glance with Daniel. This wasn't the speech Nathan had been expected to give. In preparing for tonight, I reviewed some of my father's most celebrated cases, Nathan continued, his voice steady despite the tension now palpable in the room. I found inconsistencies that troubled me deeply. Procedures documented one way in official records, but performed quite differently according to surgical notes. Patient outcomes reported as successes when complications were hidden or minimized. My father stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "Nathan, this is hardly the venue." "I think it's exactly the venue, Dad," Nathan interrupted, something I'd never seen him do before. "Before we celebrate your legacy, shouldn't we ensure it's built on truth?" The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had paused, trays suspended in mid-air. My father moved toward the podium, his face a mask of controlled fury. "My son is overcome with emotion," he announced to the room, placing a hand on Nathan's shoulder with a grip that looked painfully tight. "Perhaps we should move on to my remarks." Nathan stepped back, but not before saying clearly into the microphone, "I'm not the only one who knows, Dad." As my father took control of the podium, his composure seemingly restored, I felt Daniel shift beside me. He squeezed my hand once, then stood. "Actually, Dr. Morgan," Daniel's voice carried across the silent room. "Before you begin, I believe I have something relevant to add to tonight's celebration." All eyes turned to my husband as he walked purposefully toward the stage, carrying a small leather portfolio I hadn't noticed before. My heart hammered in my chest. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. My father's mask of benevolence slipped for a moment, revealing naked fear beneath. "This is highly irregular," he said into the microphone, but his authority seemed to diminish with each step Daniel took toward him. "No more irregular than charging insurance companies for procedures never performed," Daniel replied, his voice calm but carrying. "No more irregular than falsifying research data to secure grants. No more irregular than coercing vulnerable patients into experimental surgeries without proper consent." Gasps echoed around the ballroom. My mother's face had gone chalk white. Nathan stood to the side of the stage, his expression a mixture of vindication and sorrow. And I sat frozen, watching as my husband prepared to deliver the final blow to my father's carefully constructed life of lies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice steady as he reached the podium my father reluctantly ceded, "I apologize for interrupting this evening's carefully orchestrated celebration. However, I believe that true honor comes from truth, not carefully curated fictions." My father's face contorted with a flash of naked fury before he composed himself, leaning toward Daniel to hiss something that didn't reach the microphone. Daniel didn't flinch. "For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel West, Jessica Morgan's husband. Before my career in cybersecurity, I served in military intelligence. Those skills never quite leave you the ability to detect patterns, to follow data trails, to recognize when something doesn't add up." The room remained utterly silent, 200 people collectively holding their breath. My mother had sunk back into her chair, one hand pressed against her throat as if physically holding back words. Nathan stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching our father with an expression I couldn't decipher. 6 months ago, Daniel continued, opening his leather portfolio, I became curious about some discrepancies in Dr. Morgan's published research papers. Small inconsistencies in datasets, statistical anomalies that seemed too convenient. Professional curiosity, you might say. He removed a stack of papers from the portfolio, setting them on the podium. What began as idle curiosity quickly developed into serious concern. With help from colleagues in data forensics, I uncovered a pattern spanning nearly 20 years. My father stepped forward. "This is preposterous. I won't stand here and allow some computer technician to smear my reputation with baseless accusations." "Baseless?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, unruffled. "Dr. Evelyn Chen doesn't think they are baseless. Neither does the Hospital Ethics Committee, which has been quietly investigating you for months. Isn't that right, Dr. Chen?" All eyes turned to Dr. Chen, who stood slowly from her table near the back. "The committee's findings are still being compiled," she said carefully, but yes, serious concerns have been raised about Dr. Morgan's practices. My father's face flushed deep red. This is a conspiracy. After 40 years of service, this is how I'm thanked. With character assassination, at my own retirement dinner. It's not assassination if it's true, Dad, I heard myself say, standing from my table. The burgundy dress suddenly felt like armor rather than a costume. All eyes shifted to me, including my father's, which narrowed in barely contained rage. You, he spat. You're part of this. My own daughter. I walked toward the stage, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I only learned the truth recently, I said, my journalist's training keeping my voice clear despite my emotions. But now that I know, I can't unknow it. And neither should anyone else in this room. Reaching the stage, I took the papers from Daniel, scanning the top document, a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking discrepancies between my father's published results and the raw data recovered from hospital servers. Your experimental surgical technique that made headlines 5 years ago. I addressed the room, gesturing with the papers. The one that supposedly had a 94% success rate. The actual success rate was barely 60%. 4 patients died from complications that were never reported. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued, gaining confidence with each word, the Morgan Foundation for Neurosurgical Research. Nearly 40% of its donations were channeled into a shell company that ultimately funded my father's vacation home in the Maldives. That's enough. My father lunged forward, attempting to grab the papers from my hand. Daniel stepped between us instantly, his posture non-threatening but immovable. The insurance fraud alone is enough for criminal charges, Daniel said quietly, but in the silent room, everyone heard. 7 different insurance companies billed for procedures that patient records show were never performed. The hospital director stood up from his table. Dr. Morgan, is there any truth to these allegations? My father's professional mask reassembled itself with visible effort. These are complex medical matters being grossly oversimplified by people with no medical training, he said, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. Any discrepancies in reporting or billing were administrative errors, not deliberate deception. Administrative errors that consistently benefited you financially. Nathan stepped forward, joining Daniel and me. Administrative errors that coincidentally hid patient complications while boosting your published success rates. The shock of seeing all 3 of us united against him seemed to physically rock my father back on his heels. I have copies of all the evidence here, Daniel continued, indicating his portfolio. Including testimonials from former patients who were coerced into experimental procedures without full disclosure of risks. Including financial records showing the diversion of research funds. Including altered before and after scans that misrepresented surgical outcomes. You had no right to access those records, my father shouted, abandoning all pretense of composure. Actually, as a certified forensic investigator contracted by the hospital board 2 months ago, I had every right, Daniel replied calmly, dropping the final bombshell. What began as personal investigation became official when Dr. Chen brought her concerns to the board. I turned to my father, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time, not as the intimidating figure who had belittled me my entire life, but as a man cornered by his own deceptions. All those years, I said, my voice breaking slightly, all those years you made me feel small, inadequate, unworthy of the Morgan name. While you were building your reputation on lies and fraud. While you were literally risking patients' lives for your ego and bank account. You understand nothing about the pressures of my position, he hissed, his face now ashen. The expectations, the competition, the constant demand for innovation. I understand the difference between right and wrong, I cut him off. I understand that doctors take an oath to first, do no harm. I understand that a real legacy is built on integrity, not illusion. The hospital director had made his way to the stage now, flanked by two board members. "Charles, I think we need to continue this discussion privately," he said firmly. My father looked around wildly, perhaps seeking allies, but found only shocked faces and averted gazes. Even my mother remained seated, her expression vacant with shock. "This isn't over," my father said, his voice low and threatening as the director led him away. "You'll regret this betrayal. All of you." As they exited through a side door, the ballroom erupted into chaos, voices raised in question and exclamation, people rising from their seats, phones emerging to capture the dramatic scene. I turned to Daniel, suddenly exhausted. "You were working with the hospital board all this time?" He nodded. "When I brought my initial findings to Dr. Chen, she connected me with the board. They were already suspicious, but needed concrete evidence. I couldn't tell you because I would have been legally obligated to confront him as his daughter," I finished, understanding. "You were protecting me." Nathan approached us, looking drained. "I found discrepancies in his surgical records months ago. I confronted him privately last week. He threatened to destroy my career if I said anything." My brother's voice caught. "I've spent my entire life trying to be like him. I never imagined." I reached out and took my brother's hand, the first genuine connection between us in years. None of us saw the whole picture. He made sure of that. Wow, I need to take a breath here as I relive this moment. This confrontation changed everything for me and my family. If you're feeling the tension right now, drop a heart in the comments. The truth can be painful, but sometimes it's the only path to healing. What would you have done in my position? Would you have exposed your own father's lies in front of everyone? Stay with me, we are about to see how the aftermath of this revelation shook my entire world. Like this video if you believe karma eventually catches up to everyone, and subscribe to follow more stories about family secrets and the courage it takes to face them. The remainder of that evening passed in a blur of chaos and conflicting emotions. After my father was escorted from the ballroom, the hospital director returned to make a brief statement, his practice crisis management skills on full display. "Ladies and gentlemen, please accept our sincere apologies for this unexpected disruption. The hospital takes these allegations extremely seriously and will be conducting a thorough investigation. In the meantime, we ask for your discretion and understanding." His eyes swept the room, lingering meaningfully on several journalists present. "This is a sensitive matter involving patient privacy and medical ethics. We will issue a formal statement once we have reviewed all evidence." Despite his request, I could already see people furiously typing on their phones, the news spreading like wildfire through Boston's elite social circles. My journalistic instincts told me this would be impossible to contain. By morning, my father's carefully constructed reputation would be in tatters. A hand touched my elbow, and I turned to find my mother standing there, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears, her composure finally shattered. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice raw. "In front of everyone. Your own father." I stared at her, incredulous. "How could I?" "Mom, did you hear what he did? The lives he endangered, the money he stole." "We could have handled this privately," she hissed, gripping my arm tighter. "As a family. Instead, you've destroyed everything we've built." "Everything he built was already rotten," I replied, gently removing her hand. "Did you know any of it?" A flicker of something guilt, perhaps, crossed her face before her expression hardened. "Your father is a brilliant surgeon, who has saved countless lives. If there were shortcuts taken, or rules bent, it was in service of a greater good." Nathan stepped forward. "Mom, people died because of his shortcuts. There was no greater good, only his ego and greed." My mother looked between us, her children now united against the family narrative she had helped maintain for decades. Whatever she saw in our faces made her step back, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "I need to find your father," she said, turning away. "He'll need support right now." As she walked away, I felt a surprising pang of sympathy. My mother had built her entire identity around being the perfect surgeon's wife, the cornerstone of the perfect Morgan family. What was left for her now? Daniel put his arm around my shoulders. "We should go," he said quietly. "The press will be arriving soon, and you don't need to be here for that feeding frenzy." As if on cue, I spotted a reporter I recognized from the Boston Globe entering the ballroom, scanning the crowd with the focused intensity of a predator scenting blood. "Wait," I said, spotting Dr. Chen making her way toward the exit. "I need to speak with her first." We intercepted the older doctor near the coat check. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like regret. "Jessica, I'm so sorry," she said before I could speak. "When I gave you that envelope, I never imagined tonight would unfold this way. I thought you might speak to your father privately, persuade him to come clean voluntarily." "This wasn't your doing," I assured her. "My father's actions are his responsibility alone. I just wanted to thank you for having the courage to come forward." She nodded wearily. The evidence was too damning to ignore. "But there will be fallout for everyone at the hospital, his patients, his colleagues. Many careers and reputations are entangled with his." "Including yours?" Daniel asked perceptively. Dr. Chen gave a small, sad smile. "I was his protégé once. Many of our papers are co-authored. Yes, there will be scrutiny of everyone in his orbit." The weight of what had happened, what was still happening, settled more fully on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my father, or even just our family. The ripple effects would touch hundreds of lives. "What happens now?" I asked. "Legally, I mean. The board will review all evidence and likely refer the matter to both medical licensing authorities and law enforcement," Dr. Chen explained. "It's out of my hands now, out of all our hands." We parted with awkward handshakes, the shared knowledge of what lay ahead creating an unspoken bond between us. Outside the hotel, the cool September air was a relief after the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. Nathan had joined us, unwilling to remain alone at the mercy of shocked guests and their questions. "I need a drink," my brother announced, loosening his bow tie. "Several, actually." We found a quiet bar a few blocks away, the three of us huddled around a corner table like survivors of a natural disaster, which in some ways, we were. "I've been working toward a surgical fellowship my entire career," Nathan said after his second scotch, staring into the amber liquid, as if it held answers. "Now my last name is about to become toxic in the medical community. Everything I've worked for. You'll rebuild," Daniel said with quiet confidence. "Your work stands on its own merits." "Does it?" Nathan laughed bitterly. "How many doors were opened for me because I was Charles Morgan's son? How many opportunities came my way because of his recommendation? I've never known where his influence ended and my own abilities began." I reached across the table to take my brother's hand. "You'll find out now. And you'll be better for it." My phone had been buzzing continuously in my purse. I finally pulled it out to find dozens of missed calls and messages from friends, colleagues, even editors I'd worked with who must have already caught wind of the scandal. Among them was a text from my mother: "Your father is being questioned by the board. He asked for his lawyer. This is what you wanted. I hope you're satisfied." The unfairness of her accusation stung, but I couldn't summon the energy to respond. Instead, I turned to Daniel, who had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal. "How long have you suspected?" I asked. "About my father." Daniel sighed, swirling his untouched whiskey. "I had questions from the first time I met him. Something about the way he spoke about his work, the godlike certainty, the dismissal of complications or failures. It didn't ring true for someone in a field with so many inherent risks and unknowns. But you didn't start investigating until 6 months ago. It was the Zimmerman case that triggered it, he admitted. Remember that dinner where he was boasting about saving that state senator's wife with his revolutionary approach? I happened to know the Zimmermans socially through my previous work. When I ran into James Zimmerman at a cybersecurity conference, I asked about his wife's recovery, and his account differed significantly from your father's version. And you didn't tell me. I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. I wanted to be absolutely certain before bringing you something that would devastate you, Daniel said, his eyes pleading for understanding. And then, when the evidence became undeniable, I was legally constrained once the board investigation began. Jess, believe me, keeping this from you was the hardest thing I've ever done. Looking into his eyes, I could see the toll the past months had taken on him, as well the weight of carrying such a terrible truth, of investigating someone he knew I had complicated feelings about, of having to maintain a facade during family gatherings while gathering evidence. I understand, I said finally. I don't like that you kept me in the dark, but I understand why. Nathan cleared his throat. So what now? For all of us. The Morgan name is about to become synonymous with medical fraud. It was a question with no easy answer. Our family's implosion was just beginning, and none of us could predict where the pieces would fall. The days following my father's retirement dinner unfolded with the relentless intensity of a medical drama appropriate, given the circumstances. By morning, the Boston Globe had run a front-page story with the headline "Celebrated neurosurgeon Dr. Charles Morgan faces serious allegations of fraud and malpractice." My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters seeking insider comments from the daughter, who had helped expose her own father. I declined them all, retreating to our Cambridge apartment where Daniel and I watched the story explode across local and then national media. My journalistic colleagues respected my privacy, but their professional instincts still led them to dig deeper into the Morgan family dynamics, unearthing old society page features that now read like ironic fiction. The perfect doctor's perfect family, Charles Morgan, healing hands, generous heart. They are going to want your perspective eventually, Daniel pointed out, as we watched a cable news segment where a panel of medical ethics experts debated my father's case. Your background in investigative journalism makes you uniquely positioned to tell this story. I can't, I said, wrapping my arms around myself. Not yet. It's still too raw. My mother had stopped taking my calls entirely, communicating only through terse texts informing me that my father had been suspended pending investigation, that they had retained Boston's most prominent defense attorney, that their social calendar had mysteriously emptied overnight. The subtext was clear. I had destroyed their world, and she would never forgive me. Nathan, surprisingly, had become my lifeline. My brother called daily, as we navigated our new reality together, comparing notes on the fallout, sharing our anger and confusion, beginning to heal the rift that our father had cultivated between us for years. The hospital asked me to take a leave of absence, he told me 1 week after the dinner. Not disciplinary, they insisted, but to minimize complications during the investigation. That's not fair, I protested. You helped expose him. Too little, too late. According to some, Nathan sighed. I worked alongside him for years, Jess. Some people are wondering how I could not have known. The same question haunted me about our mother. 3 weeks after the dinner, I finally cornered her at the Beacon Hill house, refusing to leave until she spoke with me. I found her in the solarium, surrounded by wilting flower arrangements sent before the scandal broke, sympathy for Charles's retirement, not for his disgrace. Was it worth it? She asked without preamble, not offering me a seat. Destroying our family. Your father's legacy. His legacy was already destroyed, Mom. He did that himself, I replied, remaining standing to match her energy. What I don't understand is how much you knew. She turned to look out the window, her profile sharp against the afternoon light. Your father is a complicated man, Jessica. Brilliant but demanding. Of himself most of all. That's not an answer. I knew he cut corners sometimes, she admitted after a long pause. I knew there were financial arrangements that seemed creative. But I never knew the extent. I never knew about patients being harmed. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Do you believe he did those things? Now that you've seen the evidence. My mother turned back to me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. What I believe doesn't matter anymore. The board has referred the case to the district attorney's office. Your father may face criminal charges. The news hit me with physical force. I'd known it was a possibility, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a new way. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Not for exposing the truth, but for the pain it's causing you. Are you? She gave a bitter laugh. You've hated us for years, Jessica. You've rejected everything we tried to give you, everything we tried to make you into. I rejected being made to feel inadequate for pursuing my own path, I corrected her. I rejected the constant criticism, the comparisons to Nathan, the dismissal of my accomplishments, because they didn't fit your and Dad's narrow definition of success. We wanted what was best for you. No, I said gently, you wanted what looked best to your friends. There's a difference. We stood in silence, decades of misunderstanding stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. Will you stand by him? Through all of this? My mother straightened her shoulders, resuming the perfect posture of the perfect surgeon's wife. He is my husband, Jessica. For better or worse. A concept that seems increasingly unfashionable these days. I left without resolving anything, the weight of family obligation and personal integrity still at war within me. Meanwhile, former patients had begun coming forward with their stories, some defending my father passionately, others sharing experiences that confirmed the worst allegations. A support group formed for patients who believed they had been subjected to unnecessary procedures or experimental techniques without proper consent. Their stories were heartbreaking, their anger justified. 6 weeks after the dinner, the district attorney announced formal charges against my father: insurance fraud, falsifying medical records, research fraud, and in the most serious cases, criminal negligence resulting in patient harm. That same day, I received an unexpected visitor at our apartment, Sophia Torres, whose mother had died 4 years earlier following one of my father's experimental procedures. I recognized you from the news stories, she said when I opened the door, her eyes searching my face. I had to meet you. To understand how you could expose your own father. I invited her in, sensing she needed to tell her story more than she needed answers from me. Over cups of tea at our kitchen table, she showed me photos of her mother, vibrant before the surgery, then diminished in its aftermath, and finally absent altogether. Dr. Morgan told us the procedure was routine, with minimal risks, Sophia explained, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. He never mentioned it was experimental. Never mentioned the 2 patients who had already experienced serious complications. My mother trusted him completely. I listened, my heart breaking for this woman and the loss that might have been prevented if someone had exposed my father sooner. I filed a complaint with the medical board, she continued. Others did too. But nothing happened. Dr. Morgan was too powerful, too respected. Until now. She reached across the table to grasp my hand. What you did took incredible courage. Thank you. Her gratitude sat uncomfortably with me. I hadn't exposed my father out of noble intentions, but because the truth had been thrust upon me, making silence impossible. Still, her words helped ease some of the guilt I felt about the collateral damage to my family. As more patients came forward, Daniel continued working with the hospital board and now the district attorney's office, providing the technical expertise needed to unravel years of digital deception. The case was building into what legal experts on television called one of the most significant medical fraud prosecutions in Massachusetts history. Through it all, I avoided making any public statements, despite mounting pressure from media contacts who promised sympathetic coverage if I would just share my side of the story. My silence became its own story, the loyal daughter torn between family and truth, or so the narratives went. Few understood that I was simply trying to process my own feelings before attempting to articulate them for public consumption. 2 months after the retirement dinner, as autumn painted Boston in shades of gold and crimson, I finally agreed to meet with my father. The encounter was arranged by his attorney at a neutral location, a private room at his law office downtown. Daniel offered to accompany me, but this was a conversation I needed to have alone. My father looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his still impeccable attire or perfectly combed hair. The confident surgeon's posture remained, but something essential had vanished from behind his eyes. "Jessica," he greeted me formally, as if we were mere acquaintances. "Thank you for coming. Why did you want to see me?" I asked, remaining standing despite his gesture toward a chair. My attorney thought it might be beneficial if we could present a united family front before the preliminary hearing next week. His voice was clinical, detached. "Your support, or at least your silence, would be helpful." I stared at him, incredulous. "That's why you wanted to see me? To ask me to support you publicly? After everything you did?" "What I did," he replied, a flash of the old arrogance returning, "was push the boundaries of medical science. Yes, there were administrative irregularities, perhaps even ethical gray areas, but my work saved lives that would have been lost with conventional approaches." "Administrative irregularities?" I repeated, anger flaring. "Is that what you call falsifying research data? Performing experimental procedures without informed consent? Billing for surgeries that never happened? You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Jessica." His dismissive tone was achingly familiar, the same one he'd used whenever I'd achieved something he deemed unworthy of the Morgan name. "The reality is more nuanced than your husband's crude investigation suggests. The reality is that people died, Dad. Real people with families who trusted you." He waved a hand impatiently. "In neurosurgery, patients die. It's an inherent risk. What matters is how many more I saved with my innovations." I shook my head, finally understanding that my father truly believed his own justifications. In his mind, he remained the hero of his story, misunderstood and persecuted rather than held accountable. "I won't help you," I said quietly. "I won't speak against you publicly. You're still my father, and that means something to me even if it means nothing to you. But I won't support a defense built on more lies." Something flickered across his face, hurt, perhaps, or just calculation. "After everything I gave you. The education, the opportunities, the Morgan name. The name you've now tarnished beyond repair." I interrupted. "The opportunities that always came with the condition that I be someone other than myself. The education you never failed to remind me was wasted on my career choice." For the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. "I need to know one thing," I said, moving toward the door. "All those years of criticizing me, of making me feel I was never good enough, was that because you saw something in me that frightened you? Some integrity or independence that might threaten your carefully constructed facade?" My father's expression hardened. "Don't flatter yourself, Jessica. Your choices disappointed me because they were beneath your potential, nothing more." But I saw the truth in his eyes before they shuttered. He had recognized in me, from an early age, the very qualities that might have prevented his downfall had he possessed them himself: an unwavering commitment to truth, a moral compass that couldn't be recalibrated for convenience. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I hope you find a way to make amends to the people you've harmed. That would be a legacy worth preserving." As I walked out of the building into the crisp fall air, I felt something shift within me, not closure, exactly, but a stepping forward into whatever came next. The Morgan family as I had known it was finished, but perhaps something more authentic could emerge from its ruins. 1 year after my father's retirement dinner imploded, I sat in the back row of a courtroom, watching as he stood to receive his sentence. The trial had been exhaustive, with weeks of testimony from patients, medical experts, and hospital administrators. My father had maintained his innocence throughout, pleading not guilty to all charges despite mounting evidence. In the end, the jury had found him guilty on multiple counts of insurance fraud and falsifying medical records. The more serious charges of criminal negligence resulting in patient harm had resulted in a mixed verdict, guilty in 2 cases, not guilty in 3 others, where the causal link couldn't be definitively established. Dr. Morgan, the judge began, her voice firm but not unkind, your contributions to the field of neurosurgery are well documented and significant. However, the breach of trust you committed against your patients, your colleagues, and the medical profession itself cannot be overlooked or excused. My father stood ramrod straight, his expression impassive as the judge continued. I sentence you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Additionally, you will pay restitution in the amount of $2.4 million to the affected insurance companies and an additional $3.5 million to the patient compensation fund established for those harmed by your actions. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The sentence was substantial for a white-collar crime, reflecting the severity of the breach of medical ethics. My mother, sitting in the front row, brought a handkerchief to her face. Nathan, beside her, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. I had maintained my distance throughout the trial, attending key sessions, but declining to testify for either side. My father's attorney had approached me multiple times, suggesting that character testimony from his daughter might sway the jury toward leniency. The prosecution had likewise sought my participation, believing that my perspective as both family member and journalist would strengthen their case. I had refused both, choosing instead to document the proceedings privately, processing my complex emotions through the act of writing. As the bailiff led my father away, he turned slightly, his eyes scanning the courtroom. For a brief moment, our gazes met. I saw no remorse there, only a flicker of the same judgment he had always directed at me, as if even now, facing imprisonment, he found me wanting. I held his gaze steadily until he turned away. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around my mother and Nathan. I slipped out a side entrance where Daniel waited in our car. "It's done," I said simply as I slid into the passenger seat. He reached over to take my hand. "How do you feel?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. Relieved. Sad. Angry still. But mostly, free. The year since the exposure of my father's fraud had been one of profound transformation, not just for my family, but for me personally. The initial shock and media frenzy had eventually given way to a quieter reckoning. My mother had retreated from Boston society, selling the Beacon Hill house and moving to a smaller property on the North Shore. Our relationship remained strained, but not severed. We spoke monthly by phone, careful conversations that skirted the edges of the trauma we shared, but couldn't yet discuss directly. Nathan had surprised everyone by leaving medicine entirely. "I need to find out who I am without our father's influence," he'd explained when he announced his decision to pursue a master's degree in bioethics instead. "I want to help ensure that what happened with Dad never happens to another patient." Our relationship had deepened into something I'd never thought possible, a genuine sibling bond based on mutual respect and shared experience rather than obligation. Daniel's role in exposing the fraud had led to an unexpected career pivot. He now headed a specialized division focused on medical compliance and ethics investigations, helping hospitals identify potential issues before they escalated into situations like my father's. As for me, after months of private writing and reflection, I had finally found my voice and purpose. The journal I'd kept throughout the ordeal had evolved into a book manuscript, part memoir, part investigative journalism, examining how medical systems could fail so completely, how families could enable harmful behaviors through silence, and how the courage to speak truth could ultimately lead to healing. Your publisher called while you were in court, Daniel said as we drove away from the courthouse. They want to move up the release date to coincide with the sentencing news cycle. I shook my head. No. This isn't about capitalizing on a news hook. It's about contributing something meaningful to the conversation on medical ethics and institutional accountability. We'll stick to the original schedule. He smiled, squeezing my hand. That's my principal journalist. We drove to the community center where the patient support group was meeting, the group that had formed in the wake of my father's exposure and had become an unexpected source of purpose for me. Many of them had attended the trial, finding solidarity in their shared experience. I had begun volunteering with them 6 months earlier, helping them navigate the complex medical and legal systems they now found themselves entangled in. You don't have to do this today, Daniel said as we parked. Everyone would understand if you needed time after the sentencing. I need to be here, I replied. These people are part of my story now, and I'm part of theirs. Inside, 24 former patients and family members had gathered in a circle of folding chairs. Their faces lit up when they saw me, not with the curiosity or judgment I often encountered elsewhere, but with genuine welcome. Sophia Torres, who had become a close friend over the past year, crossed the room to embrace me. We saw the news. How are you holding up? I'm okay, I said, and meant it. It feels like an ending, but also a beginning. The group session that day was powerful, raw emotions about the sentencing mixed with discussions of moving forward, of finding purpose in their pain. I shared my own complicated feelings about seeing my father sentenced, about the mixture of vindication and sorrow that continued to define my experience. The hardest part, I admitted to the group, is reconciling the father I thought I knew with the man revealed through this process. I'm still grieving the loss of the former, even while I acknowledge the reality of the latter. Heads nodded around the circle. Many of them struggled with similar cognitive dissonance about the trusted doctor, who had betrayed that trust so profoundly. After the meeting, Daniel and I walked along the Charles River, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across the water. Harvard students rode past in sculls, their synchronized movements a reminder of how individual efforts could create collective harmony when properly aligned. I've been thinking about next steps, I said, watching the rowers. After the book comes out. And? Daniel prompted. I want to create something more permanent than a support group, a patient advocacy organization focused on transparency in experimental procedures and clinical trials. Something that might have protected my father's patients if it had existed before. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. You'd be perfect for that. Your journalism background, your personal connection to the issue, your integrity. My integrity, I repeated, smiling slightly. The very quality my father seemed to resent most in me. Because it was the quality he couldn't bend to his will, Daniel observed. The part of you that remained authentically Jessica, no matter how much pressure he applied. We stopped walking, turning to face the water, as the setting sun painted it gold and crimson. The Harvard campus glowed in the distance, a place where both my father and brother had walked as medical students, where generations of Morgans had built their credentials and connections. I had chosen a different path, and that choice had ultimately led me to this moment, standing firm in my truth, using my voice to help others find theirs. The Morgan legacy isn't what my father thought it was, I said, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water. It was never about prestige or appearance, or maintaining some perfect image. A real legacy is built on truth, on doing what's right even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. Daniel put his arm around me, pulling me close against the autumn chill. Your father may have given you his name, but you're the one who's redeeming it. In that moment, standing by the river that had flowed past generations of Boston stories of power and privilege, of secrets and lies, but also of courage and redemption, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me throughout the tumultuous year. The truth had cost us dearly, but it had also set us free to build something authentic from the ashes of illusion. My father would serve his sentence. My mother would rebuild her life. My brother would find his true calling. And I would use my voice to ensure that the painful lessons of our family's unraveling would protect others from similar harm. The Morgan family would never be what it once pretended to be. But perhaps it could become something better, something real. As I close this chapter of my life, I want to sincerely thank each of you who stayed with me throughout this difficult journey. Your support means everything. If my story has resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing to my channel for more discussions about family dynamics, ethical dilemmas, and the healing power of truth. Have you ever experienced a moment when standing up for what's right meant going against your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in this story, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their own family struggles. Remember, sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most meaningful growth. Until next time, this is Jessica Morgan, wishing you courage on your own journey toward authenticity.